Are you ready for the word? Let's get right into it. We're going to be looking in Enoch chapter 2, 3, 4, and 5. But before we read from Enoch, I want us to read from Jude, verse 14. I want us to reaffirm for ourselves the necessity of studying this book. We don't need to think of the study of the book of Enoch as being some fringe thing that we're doing. We should approach this book as we would any holy scripture. I say that with confidence because of what I read in Jude. Verse 14 says this, "And Enoch also, the seventh from Adam, prophesied of these, saying, Behold, Yahweh comes with 10,000s of his saints, to execute judgment upon all, and to convince all that are ungodly among them of all their ungodly deeds, which they have ungodly committed, and all of their hard speeches, which ungodly sinners have spoken against him." These verses in the book of Jude should cement into our hearts and into our minds that our study of Enoch is a worthy endeavor. Notice that Jude calls him a prophet. He didn't just, he prophesied because he was a prophet. When you open up the book of Enoch, it starts with Enoch saying that he had a vision. And he said that he saw and he understood and he knew the vision that was given to him. And then he said that he knew the vision that he had was not for his generation. And it wasn't even for the next generation. Enoch says that the vision that I saw, I knew, and I understood was for a remote generation. Well, if Jude calls him a prophet who prophesied about a vision that Yahweh gave him concerning a remote generation, how foolish would we have to be to not seek to know exactly what this prophet said and understand what this prophet said? We are remote. You understand that? From Enoch, we are remote. Now, even if we are not the exact remote generation that the vision was for, then we should study it anyway to make it known to our children for their generation. And even if it turns out that our children are not the exact remote generation that Enoch was speaking to, all the more reason to study it with fervor and with zeal, so that our grandchildren will be aware of that vision that this prophet had, the seventh from Adam. And remember that Enoch was not just any man. You understand that? He saw things that no man's ever seen before. He saw behind the scenes working of the universe. He saw the portals that the sun and the moon go in and out of. This man walked with Yahweh. And not only did he walk with Yahweh, the book of Hebrews says that before he was translated, he had a testimony. What was the testimony he had? He pleased Yahweh. So when we talk about the book of Enoch, we're talking about the writings and the prophecies of a very unique man who for 365 years walked with Yahweh and pleased him before he was translated. We're talking about a prophet who gave details unlike any details we read about anywhere else. Compare Genesis 6 story of the incursion and the giants with Enoch chapter 6. Enoch not only tells us what happened, Enoch names the intruders. I mean, that's some insight right there. He tells us what happened, and then he gives us a list of the names of the intruders and who their leaders were. He's a servant of Yahweh that we need to pay heed to. And notice what Jude did here in his writing. Jude said that Enoch prophesied, and then Jude gave a direct quote of what's written in Enoch 1. Well, how could he do that? How could he do it if it was not written down? He did it because he had a scroll and had read a scroll about the writings of Enoch. I read a scroll that was the writings of Enoch. And think about this. He couldn't and wouldn't quote a man and his book unless the people he was writing to were familiar with the writings of Enoch. I got to thinking about this yesterday. I ended up having to go to Iuka, Mississippi long drive back late in the evening. But I was driving back from Auka. I love saying that word. But I was driving back from there, and I got to thinking about, Paul was an apostle to the Gentiles. The Gentiles would not have been familiar with the book of Enoch. So there are no direct quotes in Paul's writings from Enoch. I'm not saying that he didn't allude to Enoch and agree with Enoch. I'm saying that he did not directly quote Enoch because his readers would not have been familiar with that scroll. Peter and Jude were apostles to the Jews. Both of them give direct references and quotes from the scroll of Enoch because both of them understood that their audiences would be familiar with the scroll of Enoch. Well, if they were familiar with it, we should be too. That man Enoch wrote down what he saw and understood and said it was for a remote generation. We need to become extremely familiar with what he saw and understood. Well, we've already examined Enoch 1. This morning we're going to go into chapters 2, 3, 4, and 5. They have a central theme, so we want to attempt to cover as much of them as we can as one. So we're going to start in chapter 2. If you have that little red book, it begins on page 26, I think. Enoch 2, verse 1. Observe you everything that takes place in the heaven, how they do not change their orbits, and the luminaries which are in the heaven, how they all rise and set in order, each in its season, and they transgress not against their appointed order. Pardon me. Observe means that he is expecting us to put forth some effort to become familiar with what's going on above us. There are luminaries in the heavens that do not change their orders. They rise and set, he said, in order. Those things are hard to see if we never go outside and look. If we never spend any time considering the magnificence of the heavens above us, then we're going to miss the point that Enoch wants to make to us. So Enoch expects us to walk outside occasionally at night and become familiar with what Yahweh has done in the sky, in the firmament. And the first thing he says that we will see is that all of these luminaries never change their orbit. They rise and set in their order, each in their season. And he said they do not transgress against their appointed order. Wherever the Big Dipper will be tonight, it was in the same place 5,000 years ago. And it was in the same place 500 years ago. And it was in the same place 50 years ago. It will not transgress its appointed time. I tell you what, y'all got smartphones, so help me out here just a minute. Somebody look it up and tell me what time the sun will set November the 6th in Woodville, Alabama. Tell you what, somebody else is looking that up. Amanda, you tell me what time it set November the 6th, 1976. In Woodville.
5:47.
November the 6th or November the 5th?
What's today?
Today's the 5th.
Oh.
We got to deal with that weird thing called daylight savings time.
4:47.
All right, thank you. Anybody else?
You said 1976?
Yes, a great year. Huh?
446.
Mine says 446. Anybody else on November the 6th, 2022? You said 447. Mine said 446. Anybody else says 446? All right, somebody tell me what time it set November the 6th, 1887. What time will it set November the 6th, 2044? The only thing that can change any of this is if they finally eliminate this nonsense we call daylight savings time. But How you can know those things in advance and into the past is because they never transgress their appointed order.
Right.
It doesn't matter if you go back into the 1800s or you go into the future. They have an appointed order that can be calculated. You can run the same experiment with your smartphone there, asking about the phases of the moon on any given time. They do not transgress their appointed order. Yahweh's creation is precision on display. Order like no other order. Genesis 1:14 says this, "And Elohim said, Let there be lights in the firmament of the heaven, to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and years. They are a clock and a calendar." He set them in the firmament, and that's where we're able to observe their precision. So in verse 1, Enoch tells us to look up. Now look in verse 2. He's going to tell us to look around. "Behold ye the earth, and give heed to the things which take place upon it from the first to the last. How steadfast," mark that word, "how steadfast they are. How none of the things upon earth change, but all the works of Elohim appear to you." Steadfast is a great word. My apple trees are steadfast to be apple trees. My pear trees are steadfast to be pear trees. The oak trees on my place are steadfast to be oak trees. So the question that is going to arise, the question then becomes, are we always who we were created to be? Are we always who we say we are? Our Bible tells us to be steadfast and unmovable. So what do we allow to knock us off course or cause us to change? Enoch says that when you look around the earth, they are steadfast. None of them change. So in verse 1, he said, look up. In verse 2, he said, look around. In verse 3, he says, look forward and backward and behold the seasons. Verse 3, behold the summer and the winter, how the whole earth is filled with water, and clouds and dew and rain lie upon it. So as far back as you want to go, there's always been a summer. There's always been a winter. The earth has always been filled with water, and clouds and dew and rain lie upon it. Always. Now my next point here out of verse 3, you may think it to be insignificant. Maybe not. I know I don't. I think that it demonstrates how we have become too casual in altering what Yahweh has said. Let me make that point by asking you a simple question. How many seasons are there?
4.
There you go. Well, who told you that? Who told us that? All of us would answer it that way, but who told us that? Who determined there was a spring, a summer, a fall, and a winter? Enoch just said there are 2 seasons. And when I fact-checked him against Torah, I found out he was right. Look in Genesis 8. That's the reason the Bible tells us that these who would deceive us creep in. It's just little creepy things they do that alter the word of Yahweh. Genesis 8:22, while the earth remains seed time and harvest, and cold and heat, and summer and winter, and day and night shall not cease. There are 2 seasons. Seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter. Just as surely as there is just day and night. Our attempts to create 4 seasons out of 2 leads to frustration. You know, we often say, my gosh, where'd the spring go? It just showed up. Now it's gone, right? Or man, fall didn't last long. Winter just come rushing in on top of it. Well, our frustrations are rooted in the fact that we've changed the word of Yahweh. There aren't 4 seasons, there's 2. Oh, that's a minor thing. It doesn't matter if we claim there's 4. Yeah, that's the same argument they use about every altercation or every alteration they make. It's an altercation too, but every alteration they make. Well, it doesn't matter what day we worship on. Oh, it doesn't matter if we worship with eggs and bunnies, right? Oh, it doesn't matter if we say there's 4 instead of 2. Surely we know by now that changing any part of Yahweh's word is a serious thing. There are not 4 seasons, as men say. There are only 2, summer and winter. Now to change what's been ingrained into us all of our life, that's the challenge. Let's move on to chapter 3. You ever seen us cover a chapter so fast? Chapter 3 and chapter 4 will be even quicker. Chapter 3. Observe and see how in the winter all the trees seem as though they had withered and shed all their leaves except 14 trees, which do not lose their foliage but retain the old foliage from 2 to 3 years till the new comes. Now if you'll Google that, Google will tell you there are 35 different species of evergreens. Well, that kind of puts me in a quandary. I don't know whether to believe Google or Enoch. Do 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 do. Huh? I know what I'll do. I'm going to trust the man that walked with Yahweh instead of the Google man myself. Enoch said there are 14 evergreens. Now chapter 4. And again, observe ye the days of summer, how the sun is above the earth over against it, and you seek shade and shelter by reason of the heat of the sun. You ever sought shelter from the sun? And the earth also burns with growing heat, and so you cannot tread on the earth or on a rock by reason of its heat. Enoch wants us to know not only that it is hot in the summer, he wants us to know why it's hot. He said it's hot because the sun positions itself above the earth over against it. Now that's not what I was taught in school.
That's right.
This is what the National Weather Service says. It says, it's all about the tilt of the earth's axis. Many people believe that the temperature changes because the earth is closer to the sun in summer and farther from the sun in winter. In fact, the earth is farthest from the sun in July and is closest to the sun in January. But during the summer, the sun's rays hit the earth at a steep angle, straight down. The light does not spread out as much, thus increasing the amount of energy hitting any given spot. Also, the long daylight hours allow the earth plenty of time to reach warm temperatures. But during the winter, the sun's rays hit the earth at a shallow angle. These rays are more spread out, which minimizes the amount of energy that hits any given spot. Also, the long nights and short days prevent the earth from warming up. Thus, we have winter. I don't care how long the days are or how short the days are. The heat and cold is not determined by the length of the days. It's determined by the position of the sun. But what the National Weather Service just said is exactly what I was taught in high school. Exactly. And it is an exact lie. It has nothing to do with the tilt of the earth. It has to do with the course of the sun. NASA says it this way. Earth's axis is an imaginary pole going right through the center of Earth from top to bottom. Earth spins around this pole, making one complete turn each day. That is why we have day and night and why every part of Earth's surface gets some of each. Earth has seasons because its axis doesn't stand up straight. Now let's go back and let's pay attention to the first sentence from NASA. The axis is an imaginary pole. You have to imagine it being there because it's not there. It doesn't exist. But we want you to believe you are on a spinning globe, so we imagine that there is an axis there. Well, Enoch, the man who walked with Yahweh and pleased him, tells us that in the summer, the sun positions itself above and over against the earth. It gets right above you, and it bears down hard, and it heats things up. Some places hotter than others. That's what the man that walked with Yahweh said. I'm going to believe him. Enoch 4:1, again, observe ye the days of summer, how the sun is above the earth over against it. You seek shade and shelter by reason of the heat of the sun. And the earth also burns with growing heat, so that you cannot tread on the earth or on a rock by reason of its heat. When I was growing up, it wasn't until I was in the latter part of junior high that they paved the highway in front of our home. They didn't use concrete. I don't think there was any such thing as asphalt. May have been, I don't know. But I know they didn't use asphalt. They used tar and gravel. That's where they'd come in, smooth out the chert, the dirt, and spray a layer of tar down and then spread a layer of gravel on top of it. And hope the tar sticks to the dirt and sticks to the gravel and gives you a paved highway. Well, in the summertime, you learn real quick not to walk barefoot upon that paved road. That hot sun would melt the tar and cause it to bubble up. And not only would it burn you when you stepped on it, it would stick to your feet and burn you for stepping on it later on. That tar was horrible stuff to deal with. Summertime is hot. You go down into Florida and try to walk on some parts of the beach in the summertime. It'll burn you. So the point Enoch's making is summertime's always come. And it's always hot, just as Genesis 8 promised it would be. Summertime isn't cold. And there are surfaces that will always burn your feet. And there's always a need to seek shelter from the heat in a shade. So knowing this, why do you suppose we still complain about it when it shows up? We know it came last year and year before and the year before. And our grandfather told us about having to pick cotton in summer heat ever since he was 4. So we ought to know summer's coming back next year. And guess what? When it comes, it's going to be hot. Always has been, always will be. Observe ye how the trees cover themselves with green leaves and bear fruit. Wherefore give ye heed and know with regard to all his works, and recognize how he that lives forever has made them so. Notice the 4 verbs that Enoch uses here. He said, observe, give heed, know, and recognize. Observe, give heed, know, and recognize. No doubt throughout our lives we have observed the changing of seasons. We thought there were 4, but there were only 2, but we have observed them. We have seen trees drop their leaves and appear to be dead, and then we have seen them cover themselves with leaves and bear fruit, just like Enoch said they would. So we have done verb number 1, observed it. Now Enoch asks us to do 3 other things. He said, now give heed to what you observed. Don't take it for granted. Allow it to give you pause and cause you to understand that this order that you are observing was set in place by our Elohim, who is the creator of all things. It's not just a random weird thing taking place. It was an order set in place. Verb number 3 was, and know. To know something is to become convinced of it. To know something, you have to become acquainted with it. You have to study it. You have to inquire about it. So he said we are to observe it, give heed to it, and know it, to become convinced and acquainted with what's taking place. I've said it this way for years. If we'll only observe creation, all of it testifies of the awesomeness of Yahweh. It doesn't matter how you observe it. If you look at creation with your eyes, creation testifies. But if you look at creation with a microscope, no matter how powerful the microscope, what you find will shout to you, Yahweh's awesome. If you look at creation with a telescope, no matter where you look, what you find declares the glory of Yahweh. All of creation testifies of His magnificence. The last verb Enoch used was recognize. To recognize something means that you identify it. or you acknowledge its reality or validity. So Enoch tells us to look at creation, make a conscious effort to acknowledge the reality of Yahweh as a living Elohim who made everything that we see. Instead of just saying, wow, when we behold its beauty, we ought to be saying, wow, Yahweh, that's good. Yeah. Instead of taking for granted the fruit we harvest and eat, we should declare often, my Elohim did this. Amen. It's been said, I don't know by who, but it has been said, any fool can count the seeds in an apple, but only Yahweh can count the apples in a seed. Let me encourage you sometime to handle seeds. You'll become overwhelmed by the wisdom, power, and glory of your Elohim. Hold a kernel of corn in your hand and look at it. It is hard to comprehend that inside that little old seed is a stalk that will grow 6, 7, 8 feet tall, that have put on 2 or 3 ears of corn with hundreds of kernels of corn on it. It's hard to comprehend that all of that is in that one kernel of corn. I have sat before and just been mesmerized looking at a tiny little tomato seed. You have to handle them with tweezers, they're so small. And inside of it is a plant that will grow 3, 4, 5 feet tall, some of them taller than that. And produce, some of them will produce 40 to 50 pounds of tomatoes. 50 pounds of tomatoes inside that little tiny seed. Hold an apple seed. A 15, 20 foot tree inside that thing that will produce apples for years and years and years. Evil men genetically modify fruits and produce so that they do not have seeds because of their greed. Yahweh created all things with a seed because of His loving kindness and His tender mercy. And that's what Enoch is calling upon you and I to do. He is saying that we can thwart wickedness. We can hold back wickedness if we'll just become more aware of our Creator and everything that we see, and help make other people more aware of how awesome Yahweh is. Yahweh created all things. Verse 2, and all His works go on thus from year to year forever, and all the tasks which they accomplish for Him, and their tasks change not, but according as Elohim has ordained, so is it done. Hallelujah. Enoch has been talking about trees and luminaries, mostly trees. And listen to what he says about trees. He says they accomplish all of their tasks for Him. They do what they do for Yahweh. The stars are where they are for Him. The sun moves as it does for Him. The moon does what it does for Him. My apple trees do what they do for Him. My fig tree does what it does for Him. I don't have to worry about my fruit trees forsaking their order, or the sun or the moon forsaking their order. They do what they do for Him. They do today what they were created to do in the beginning. They change not. Fig trees bore figs in Yeshua's day, and they still bear figs in my day. They change not. Yahweh has ordained it to be so. You know, Mark tells us that Yeshua went to get figs off a fig tree one day because he was hungry. You remember? On his way to the temple? But the fig tree didn't have any figs. What did Yeshua do? Cursed it. Peter was amazed when he saw it, because that thing dried up from the roots. The next day it was dead. Mark adds a commentary. he gives us some information that we need to know, and I want to read that to you. Mark 11:13. And seeing a fig tree afar off, having leaves, he came, if haply he might find anything thereon. And when he came to it, he found nothing but leaves. Why? Mark says, for the time of figs was not yet. You remember what day he was going into Jerusalem at that time? It was the 11th day of the month of Abib. The 11th day of the first month. We're still quite a ways away from figs maturing or even being on the vine. So this event happened on the 11th day of the month of Abib. Way too early for figs. There weren't any figs because it wasn't the season yet for figs. And my point here is this. Fig trees bore figs in Yeshua's day every time when it was time. And they still do it in my day when it's time. Well, I guess I need to explain that before I move on. I brought the illustration in. Why did he curse the fig tree?
Didn't have any fruit.
Didn't have any fruit, but it wasn't the season for fruit. Now I got to be careful. You may not like this. He wasn't in a good mood that morning. What's he on his way to do? Come on, what's he on his way to do? He about to clean the temple out. He's about to throw over tables. He's about to pull out a whip. He's about to run folks off. What he saw the day before infuriated him. You've made my father's house a den of thieves, he said. That fig tree was in the wrong place at the wrong time. I'm sure I'll get some emails and comments on YouTube about that.
Makes no sense.
I believe it.
Yahweh created everything the way he created them, and they continue to be as he created them to be. Now let's see if I can get myself out of trouble and move on. My dad has a huge fig tree that sits on a hill above his house. I admired it for years, but finally one spring, I went beyond just admiring it. I went up there. It had some young growth coming up around the base of it. So I went into his shed, got a shovel, came out and broke those little shoots off with a little bit of root on them, and I brought them to my house and I planted the things. His fig tree is now producing figs in his yard and in my yard. Yahweh created it that way. That's amazing and awesome. He has a beautiful willow tree near his barn. One day I was up there. I started to say early spring. That would have been horrible. There are only two seasons, there's winter and summer. I was up there early summer. And I'd been working in Dad's garden, helping him out, and I noticed that willow tree, and I got up, went over there and took my knife, and I cut off the hanging down of some newer limbs off of that tree. Just cut down 3 or 4 of them. I put them in a water jug, and I brought them home, and when I got home, I cut them into little 5 inch or 6 inch little sticks. And I took a mason jar and I stuck them in the mason jar and set them on my windowsill. And in just a few days, it was just covered with roots. I took them out, put them in a pot, set the pots outside. It wasn't long before they were 2 and 3 feet tall. I took them then and went out in my garden and cut me a little furrow and planted them in the garden. Covered them up real good. By the end of that summer, them things were 5 and 6 feet tall. So I took some of them and planted them in my yard. I put one out in the chicken pen. I put one in the backyard. Put one out here. My dad's weeping willow is still at his place. But now it grows at my house too. His willow grows here. And if you want to see how beautiful one can be, go out to my chicken pens. The chickens are amazing fertilizers. And that one does better than any other willow tree I have, because they make sure it has food. Right? My point is, Yahweh made that willow tree that way. Made it to produce and reproduce. In verse 3, Enoch says, "And behold how the sea and the rivers in like manner accomplish and change not their task from his commandments." Aren't you glad that the Tennessee River doesn't decide one morning that it's tired of flowing through Alabama and changes its course and just decides to run through Georgia? Wasn't long ago there was a fight between governors saying, we want some of that. Aren't you glad that the Mississippi River doesn't decide it's tired of flowing through Mississippi and so it changes its course and hangs a hard right in Arkansas and flows out toward Oklahoma? They do not flow where they wish, they flow where they are commanded. We take that for granted. Enoch says, quit taking it for granted. They flow where they flow because Yahweh told them to. It was commanded of them. The sea in like manner accomplishes its task year after year. But, Enoch said, but the luminaries do not trespass their order. The earth does not change. The seasons do not change. The fruit trees do not change. The rivers do not change. The seas do not change. Everything that was created by Yahweh obeys Yahweh steadfastly, except for men. Verse 4, but you have not been steadfast, nor done the commandments of Yahweh. But you have turned away and spoken proud and hard words with your impure mouths against his greatness. O you hard-hearted, you shall find no peace. Therefore shall you execrate your days, and the years of your life shall perish, and the years of your destruction shall be multiplied in eternal execration, and you shall find no mercy. In those days you shall make your names an eternal execration unto all the righteous. And by you shall all who curse, curse, and all the sinners and godless shall imprecate by you. And for you, the godless, there shall be a curse. And and that word is missing from the manuscript, something shall rejoice. Probably the elect, but that word's missing. And there shall be forgiveness of sins, and every mercy and peace and forbearance. There shall be salvation unto them, a goodly light. And for all you sinners there shall be no salvation, but on you all shall abide a curse. But for the elect there shall be light and joy and peace, and they shall inherit the earth. And then there shall be bestowed upon the elect wisdom, and they shall all live and never again sin, either through ungodliness or through pride. But they who are wise shall be humble, and they shall not again transgress, nor shall they sin all the days of their life, nor shall they die of the divine anger or wrath, but they shall complete the number of the days of their lives, and their lives shall be increased in peace, and the years of their joy shall be multiplied in eternal gladness and peace all the days of their life. Hallelujah. Well, I wanted us to get to chapter 5, but chapter 5 needs more time than I can give it this morning. We need to devote a whole session to what's written there, but it would have been unfair to take chapter 2, 3, and 4 and not tie it to chapter 5, because they have one central theme. It's really the same point that Jude made in his writing. Let's read that one more time, and I'm going to point us toward a closing. Jude chapter 1, or Jude. There is one chapter. Jude, verse 1. The servant of Yeshua the Messiah and brother of James, to them which are sanctified by Yahweh the Father and preserved in Yeshua the Messiah and called. Called, those are the ones that Enoch would refer to as the elect. The elect are the ones who have been called or invited and who have responded to the invitation, okay? Mercy unto you and peace and love be multiplied. Beloved, when I gave all diligence to write unto you of the common salvation, it was needful for me to write unto you and exhort you that you should earnestly contend for the faith which was once delivered unto the saints. There's always someone out who is trying to contaminate the faith that's been delivered to us. Verse 4, for there are certain men crept in unaware who were before of old ordained to this condemnation, ungodly men turning the grace of our Elohim into lasciviousness, and denying the only Adonai, Yahweh, and our Master Yeshua the Messiah. What does lasciviousness mean?
Lawless.
Okay. So Jude's warning us about ungodly men who come in among the elect and try to convince them that because of grace they no longer have to walk in Torah. Agree?
Right.
They turn grace into lasciviousness. Strong says that the root word used here means to be continent. And it has a negative participle in front of it. So lasciviousness means to be incontinent. That is, unable to control, shall we call them, urges. Amanda tells me there are certain things I shouldn't say from the pulpit. This may be one. That's the reason I'm using the word urges. And I'm using the word incontinent. Imagine, if you will, a person who is incontinent. They just cause a mess anywhere and everywhere. They're not bothered or embarrassed by their incontinence. Instead, they start a campaign in which they declare everybody should be incontinent. Everyone should feel no shame and everyone should feel no restraint. They should just mess here and mess there and be proud of the mess they make. James said that those who teach that kind of grace, those that teach that grace means that we don't have to follow Torah, may as well be teaching us to mess in our pants without restraint. He said it's the same thing. To say you can have grace and not have to keep Torah is saying it's okay to be incontinent. You know, if you have the urge to break the Sabbath, just break it. If you have the urge to celebrate a pagan holiday, just go break it. Just go do it. If you have the urge to eat a pork chop, eat it.
Then rub some grace on it.
There you go. Rub some grace on it. That is turning grace into incontinence.
That's good.
Listen to Jude's warning that he gives, and he gives it with examples to prove that he is correct. I will therefore put you in remembrance, though you once knew this, how that Yahweh, having saved the people out of the land of Egypt, afterward destroyed them that believed not. Let me paraphrase. Jude said, if you believe that you can transgress Torah without penalty, you need to be reminded of the children of Israel that were not able to cross the Jordan. Verse 6, and the angels which kept not their first estate, but left their own habitation, he has reserved in everlasting change under darkness unto the judgment of the great day. He got this out of the book of Enoch. So what he's saying, if I might paraphrase, if you believe you can transgress Torah without penalty, you need to be reminded of Enoch chapter 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. Those angels that transgressed, those angels that thought they weren't required to obey the order that Yahweh had given to them, found themselves in a place where repentance would not work. There was no forgiveness. They were condemned forever. Verse 7, even as Sodom and Gomorrah and the cities about them in like manner giving themselves over to fornication and going after strange flesh are set forth for an example, suffering the vengeance of eternal fire. If you believe you can transgress Torah without penalty, you need to be reminded of Sodom and Gomorrah. They are set forth as an example. So the point is, anytime you hear someone preaching grace, it tells you don't have to follow Torah. Anytime you hear someone preaching that incontinence is what you should aim for, remind yourself that that kind of thinking is what created Sodom and Gomorrah. And that kind of thinking always does create a Sodom and Gomorrah. Jude's message and Enoch's is the same. That is, everything we can see, everything in Torah tells us that we will not be held guiltless if we disobey Yahweh. If the sun obeys him, so should I. If the moon obeys him, it is declaring through millennials, so should I. If my apple trees obey him, if my pear trees obey him, if my fig tree obeys him, if my willow tree obeys him, so should I. On a more personal note, let me close with this. I don't watch a lot of TV. I like to watch football, certain teams, like Alabama. And other teams that might affect where they are and what they're doing. When it comes to the NFL, I don't really like to watch a team. Sometimes I will watch players. I like to watch Jalen Hurts. I like to watch Tua. I like to watch Mac. Most evenings, so that's the limited amount of football I watch, and most evenings when I'm eating dinner, not every evening, but many evenings while I'm eating dinner, I'll watch an episode of of Law and Order. When Detective Lenny Briscoe and Chief Assistant District Attorney Jack McCoy capture and convict a criminal and put him in prison, I like that. I cheer for Detective Lenny and Jack McCoy. When I read Enoch 2, 3, 4, and 5, the name of that show comes to mind. Law and Order. That's how Yahweh works. You can't have one without the other. If you eliminate the law, you eliminate the order. Amen. If you have law, you create order. Without law, there's chaos and wickedness. Listen again to Enoch in chapter 5, verse 4. You have not been steadfast nor done the commandments of Yahweh. To be steadfast as the crowning creation of Yahweh here on earth means that we have to do the commandments of Yahweh. To be steadfast as His crowning creation, we have to do the commandments of Yahweh. Trees do what they're meant to do. Luminaries do what they're meant to do. They have commandments. They follow Him. They follow them. Likewise, Yahweh did not just put us here and leave us to our own hearts and our own devices. That would bring a tidal wave of wickedness. Instead, He created us and gave us Torah, instructions on how to function here in the place He created for us. It's law and order. Which brings me to my closing point. As I read these chapters and saw all of the order displayed because of Yahweh's commands, I was made painfully aware of the fact that Yahweh loves, even demands, order.
Yes.
He doesn't let the sun do whatever it wants. He doesn't create a fruit tree and let it do whatever it wants. They all have specific assignments. He demands order. Go and read again for yourself the instruction given for the building of the tabernacle. There was order and beauty demanded in the instructions. Go again and read the instruction for the apparel of the high priest. There was order and beauty demanded in the instruction that Yahweh gave. Yahweh loves order. He gave Solomon wisdom. How did that wisdom reveal itself? In order and beauty. Go to 1 Kings 10. 1 Kings 10. And when the queen of Sheba heard of the fame of Solomon concerning the name of Yahweh, she came to prove him with hard questions. She came to Jerusalem with a very great train, with camels that bear spices and very much gold and precious stones. And when she was come to Solomon, she communed with him of all that was in her heart. And Solomon told her all her questions. There was not anything hid from the king which he told her not. And when the queen of Sheba had seen all Solomon's wisdom and the house that he had built and the meat of his table and the sitting of his servants and the attendance of his ministers and their apparel, not what Solomon was wearing, but what his servants wore, and his cupbearers, and his ascent by which he went up into the house of Yahweh, there was no more spirit left in her. Listen to the TEV translation of that. She saw the food that was served at his table, the living quarters for his officials, the organization of his palace staff, and the uniforms that they wore, the servants who waited on him at feast, and the sacrifices he offered in the temple. It left her breathless and amazed. The order and beauty that was all around Solomon as a result of his wisdom left her breathless. When I behold my yard and my garage and my truck and my desk, I don't see order. And I know that I can't fix it all in one weekend, but I am determined to have a paradigm shift in my thinking. I'm determined to remind myself and to let all of creation remind me that Yahweh loves beauty and order.
Amen.
I need laws in my life to create the order that will please Him. Laws like, don't be lazy. Don't ignore that thing that's out of place. Create a place for this. Organize this. Clean that. Throw that away. Give that away. For there to be order, there has to be laws. All right, folks, do this. Go outside at night some and let the luminaries testify to you. Look at a seed occasionally and let it testify to you. Reject all preaching that promotes incontinence. And remember always, Yahweh loves beauty and order. Yahweh bless you and keep you. Yahweh make His face shine upon you and be gracious to you. Yahweh lift up His countenance upon you and give you peace. As His name is put upon you, so shall He Himself bless you. Hallelujah.